Welcome to SpanReads, not your typical rereads podcast, a 17 Shards series where we reread the Cosmere and are giant nerds about it. Today, we will be talking about the magic in the Hero of Ages. Joining me is Bish.
Hi, also known as firstRainbowRose.
Also joining me is Ian.
Hey, I'm your Rudder.
And next we've got Matt.
Comatose on the forums.
Also we have Rosemary.
I'm Kaymyth.
And finally we've got Kadie.
Aon Ene.
And I am Jessie, or Lady Lameness on the forums of Discord. This episode will have spoilers for Mistborn Era 1 only. There won't be any other spoilers for outside of the 3 Mistborn Era 1 books. Okay, on to magic. Ian, would you like to give us an overview of Hemalurgy?
Well, before we get into Hemalurgy, we do learn a little, we learn about Electrum, super
True.
Interesting. I don't think we learn anything about Furukami in this book that we didn't already know. But yes, the main thing is Hemalurgy. You can stab people with metal and steal parts of their souls and then stab yourself and you can get abilities. The epigraphs in this book in particular talk a lot about Hemalurgy and about
the only way we get to find out the information.
Mm-hmm. Vin's earring was a spike the whole time. It's this is how the Inquisitors were made. This explains the weird spikes they found in the Coloss bodies. So it's been a part of the world the entire time, and we finally get to explain it and understand it, which is great.
The Khandra too, getting Tensoon's point of views with the blessings, and then there's a dotted line there.
One thing that I picked up on that I wish I had paid better attention to, because by the time I picked up on it, I went, is Vin's earring, theoretically, if it's supposed to be a hemalurgic spike, that means that only when she's wearing her earring should she be piercing the copper cloud. But I believe that I'm wait, but does that mean, do we have any evidence of her piercing a copper cloud and not wearing the earring? Or is it just a case of she's always wearing the earring?
She's always wearing the earring.
Yeah, almost always. The only time she's been able to take in the mists have been those few points where she's had it out for one reason or another. And one of the epigraphs even details those 3 instances.
Yeah.
One of the epigraphs goes over how Ruin was subtly manipulating her so that she was always going to wear the earring, and how she had actually almost stopped wearing it up till the point that she puts it back in when she gets to Kelsier's crew, and then what he says to her prompts her to keep it in, and then Ruin just kind of keeps pushing on that to keep it in her ear the whole time.
Well, yeah, and when she puts it in, reading it in hindsight, when she puts it in for the first time, there's not really an emotional attachment to it or anything. She just kind of says, oh, I need to bring this with me, so I'm putting it in so that I'm not carrying it, right? So she wants to bring it with her, so she's putting it in, the only thing she got from her mother. And then, but yeah, as it goes on, she's because the conversation with Kelsier is, she's oh, should I stop wearing my earring? Because
it's made of metal.
Because it's made of metal? And he's oh no, if it's piercing your skin, it should be fine. And then, all of a sudden, in later books, as it goes on, she's oh yeah, no, I like keeping my earring in. Or, oh no, I don't want to wear noblewoman earrings. I just want to wear just this earring. And it's you didn't seem that attached to it before.
Yeah, and it's
he only gives it back to her, no.
Yeah, it's it's easy to mistake that as she's growing more in touch with her emotions. It's she's finding this attachment to the thing. No, it's Ruin. It's Ruin.
It's Ruin.
But it's also interesting, comparing her, because that's how Ruin can speak to her as Reen. Comparing that to Ruin speaking to Spook as Kelsier. It's there's a couple of moments from Sazed's point of view where Spook says something along the lines of I think if Kelsier was here, this is exactly what he would suggest. And it's you know, like Ruin's whispering in his ear, like in Kelsier's voice. And just like, dirty, rotten, eldritch god of destruction.
Something that I picked up on this time that I think I've missed every other time is that when Kelsier appears to Spook in the marketplace, like near the end, Quellion also sees him. And Quellion's reaction is very much one that made me think that he's seen Ruin before as well. And Ruin's been actively appearing enough to Quellion that he's not surprised to suddenly see Kelsier on the stage.
Oh, like, because, 100%. Like, I think Ruin was doing the same thing with Quellion that, like, he was doing with Spook. Like telling, because, like, Quellion's like, oh, like, I'm doing what the survivor wants to do. It's like, yeah, like, who you think is the survivor.
But Quellion also placed his own spike, apparently? Like, according to one of the epigraphs.
Yeah, Quellion was already a little unstable enough, probably enough that Ruin could whisper to him, because Ruin can do that if you're not.
It's just how...
I
guess he made a spike and used that. It just killed someone for it.
Well, yeah, like, we don't know, for example, Zane doesn't remember how he got his spike. And Vin's mom also, I think, was unstable enough. The thing I find interesting with the Hemalurgy is how he builds on the flaw in Hemalurgy, right? Because that was introduced at the end of the last book with Tensoon and the Coloss, right? And then we see in this book, as we learn about Ruin's power, Ruin controls the Inquisitors. That's established in the previous book a little, but like confirmed in the first March chapter, right? And then you don't, though, at least I didn't the first time I read it, think, like Vin and Elend are running around with these huge Coloss armies that they're controlling with emotional allomancy. And then, of course, they get to that key moment and Ruin's like, oh yeah, I could have taken all of your armies at any time. And I really like that Brandon gave us the information about the extent of Ruin's powers to like figure that out. Because like sometimes with these god characters, you can get a little like they can do whatever they want when the plot demands it. And Ruin's power still felt like it had clear limits. And there was just enough misdirection that you didn't foresee necessarily how he was going to use it.
And then when it does happen, it's that aha moment of, this makes sense.
Speaking of the Coloss, something that I don't understand but accept as cool is that when Vin and Elend take control of them, they have that control whether they're burning metals or not afterwards, and whether they're awake or whether they're asleep. And I have no idea how that works on like a romantics level, but it was cool.
It has something to do with connection.
Yeah,
because it always comes down to connection. So they use the emotional allomancy to establish the connection to the Coloss, and it stays unless something else interferes.
That makes sense.
I do wonder with the Kandra, since they're like seem more difficult to control and more like individual, if the Kandra wouldn't be able to be controlled like passively like the Coloss are. Like I wonder if that's something, and maybe it's partially the Coloss were intentionally built that way to be especially susceptible, that you could maintain that connection, since they are kind of made to be mindless super armies, right? So yeah, I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah,
plausible.
Agreed. I actually want to touch on the Inquisitors again, because they have spikes driven through their eyes, so they can't see with normal human vision. A thing I picked up on for the first time in this book is like Marsh raised an eyebrow, scanning the room with his spiked eyes. The way his sight worked, it was hard for him to distinguish. It was hard for him to distinguish colors, but he was familiar enough with his powers now that he could pick them out if he wanted. The allomantic lines from the metals inside of most things were really quite expressive, and like that is interesting to me because it's not just like he can see the lines. It's like he can get more information from them. And like it reminds me of when in Bell of Ascension, when Vin like seeked Breeze and like picked up like what emotions he was soothing, is like, do like those allomantic sightlines like also transmit more information than we think? Which like the phrasing here is a little ambiguous, but it's like it's an interesting question for me going forward.
I was going to quote the exact same thing, that exact same passage. So that's great. One line that's right after that you didn't quote that might be relevant is, to Marsh, the mansion was a place of pristine whiteness and bright blobs of expensive color. Which I'm not sure if that tells us much more. Like, maybe that the blobs of color were the lines of light. Maybe the lines of light change color if you figure out how to tap into that. I don't know.
Yeah, because like for Vin and like everyone else, like the lines are described as blue.
Yes, they're all,
which makes sense
blue,
based off of like the chemistry of iron, but like the mechanics of Inquisitor steel sight is like there's more there than I had originally expected.
I mean, there's obviously enough variance and sensitivity that apparently Marsh can read words scratched into metal, even though Ruin can't.
You know, that's an interesting question I had, is could Marsh have read the message if it wasn't scratched into metal? Like, I think there's some mention that he can see the metals in ink, or whatever, but
yeah,
I do kind of wonder if maybe he could see better because it was scratched in metal, and if it was in like, although I guess most writing, like even if you're writing with lead, like lead's a metallic, right? So you could see that too.
Technically it's graphite, not really lead, but
yeah.
A bit that I really liked was actually about allomancy, and it isn't really about the magic mechanics of it, but more the behavioral patterns that can come out of it. And it's Vin talking about the idea of Allomancy addiction, and I just found it really, really fascinating. She goes, she immediately tried to burn pewter to strengthen her body. The lack of metal was like missing a limb. As she sat up, coughing further and growing dizzy, she found herself craving the metal more than she had imagined that she ever would. Allomancy wasn't supposed to be addictive, not like certain herbs and poisons. However, at that moment, she could have sworn that all the scientists and philosophers were flat out wrong. And I found it really interesting because, like, clearly allomancy doesn't have addictive properties to it, but the behavioral patterns can become addictive. And I just really liked that little bit of insight that was put in, because that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think also what it's trying to tell us there is that Vin was at least partway on the pathway to being a pewter savant, because she had burned so much of it over the course of her life. And I know there's an epigraph in here that talks about how most people who try to become pewter savants wind up killing themselves on the way. And Vin has come close to that before. So I think that's what that was intended to try to get across, is that, Vin was savanting herself on pewter.
It would be very interesting if the downside to being a pewter savant was something that was akin to addiction, and like that feeling of constantly needing more. That would be a very interesting downside.
If you're so used to depending on that extra strength, if it's gone, you just feel so weak and helpless.
And if it makes you want to have more and more, it's got the exact same like setup as a drug would, making you have more and more and more until it eventually kills you.
Well, I think what it is, when it go on the path to a pewter savant killing you means that you push your body so hard that you're just so close to the edge so much that if you run out of pewter at the wrong time, you die.
Yeah. Well, yeah, your body becomes, like more physically dependent on it. Similar to with tin, because you could presume likely that since they're paired metals, they have similar savant effects. And with tin, you get so used to the heightened senses that when you stop burning it, you can't feel or perceive anything, right? And so to me, like, yeah, it makes sense with pewter. You get so used to the increase that, you're weak and clumsy and unhealthy, basically, without it, because your body is like, oh, I have this great magic propping me up. I don't need, like, other stuff. So
some of your skills would like fall into disuse as your body didn't need to practice them anymore.
Although one thing I liked about this book is they gave Vin another fighting without allomancy moment when she uses like the chicken grease to get out of the cuffs and
Throws screws at people.
them.
Yeah. Vin is a BAMF with or without allomancy.
Yeah.
And like, she's clever about it.
Yeah.
Because like as Ene said, like the throwing screws at people is like, they're 100% going to think you're pushing them at them. It's like, yes, brilliant. Another thing I want to pick up is the first and well ascension in this book. Like, Vin started noticing like a change in the mist around her. It's like it no longer like danced around her. It was repelled. It was like because of her spike.
And we get an epigraph that says the longer you have your spike in, the more your body adjusts to it and the more it affects the mists. Which is why it didn't at first.
Compared to like, there's a scene with Ellen, like right after she gets captured, where like he really is starting to like starting that like downward slope of like where until he has a realization that he's a lot like the Lord Ruler. Yet Elen found it hard to distrust the mist. They just felt right. How could they be his enemy? They spun, swirling around him just slightly as he burned metals, like leaves spinning in a playful wind. As he stood there, they seemed to soothe away his concerns about Vin's captivity, giving him confidence that she would find a way out. Now that, in the book, that's a lowercase s on soothe. But I'm like, is that actually a capital S soothe? Because we know the Mist Spirits used emotional allomancy on him at the end of Well of Ascension. Was Laras trying to prop Ellen up here?
I think so.
Yeah, I could see it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that being, especially where he later, a few days later shows up and actually, full on shows up to him. It would make sense that he would already be aware of where Ellen is mentally and emotionally.
I mean, swallowing that bead of preservation connected him to preservation in a very strong way. So, makes sense. That and the fact that I think he and Vin are the only Mistborn left at this point.
And I just think Ellen's personality is very in tune with preservation, which also like goes into like him, like Vin being able to like directly fuel his allomancy at the end of the book. I think them being married was a huge part of that, but also like he's just naturally connected to the power that she now is. Like it all plays a role. And well, we've spoken of preservation. Ruins also gets like a couple of really great lines in describing himself that I want to mention, because descriptions of shards are like one of my favorite things, because earlier on it's like all things are subject to their own natures. Like you cannot blame me for being what I am. Without me, nothing would end. Nothing could end. And therefore, nothing could grow. I am life. Would you fight life itself? And then later on, you realize the forces I can bring to bear against you, child. You realize the power I have, the destruction I represent. I am the mountains that crush. I am waves that crash. I am storms that shatter. I am the end. Like, yes. Yes.
Oh, really scary.
He also calls himself Passion at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just bringing that up to hurt everyone.
Yeah, but it's like this like interesting like duality within Ruin of like life and the end. Like, and it's like, oh, like, because like we do focus very much on like the intent of a shard when they're really much more expansive than a single word can really define.
And they're also, you know, missing a lot because they were never meant to be. It's like when Sazed picks up the powers at the end, he realizes even though that they'd try to repel each other, they were always meant to be part of each other, and they never should have been broken. And that's a clue to things we can't talk about this episode.
And we also like learned about like shards are blind to metal, at least on Scadrial, and it's like being like that's why the caches are all like near mineral deposits, and it's like Atium was smuggled in like crates of coins. It's like all like so cool, and I like Brandon's writing, guys. I like his attention to detail. Magic is cool. The myth sickness like was creating allomancers. Like that's a huge thing. It also explains like why it didn't impact like the Terrace people or the nobles.
Because they don't have any allomancy potential in them.
Yeah.
Or in the nobles' case,
they've already been tested. They already know they're not an allomancer.
Like I assume if a noble hadn't gone through that process, they would have been affected, possibly like the Scour.
Yeah, it's basically like noble society is very good at drawing out any residual allomantic potential, and so like the myths like will like add investiture like if necessary to get somebody to the point where they can snap, because like they need to hit 16% every single time. So that like there is some fiddling with the genetics there, but like noble society like already brings them below the point that like the mist sickness like cares about. So it's like, yeah.
See, Spook becoming a Mistborn was foreshadowed because you had preservation turning people into mistings. You have Sazed turning Spook into a Mistborn. It's clearly established that's part of the power set.
I think Ian's gonna hurt you, man.
And like I DM you in a D&D game. Like I have control.
Just kidding.
Backtracking.
Any other magic things people want to talk about?
I think one other thing about the magic in this book that I like is, well, mainly just Vin's last fight scene. Like you just get to see it pushed like like it's like, okay, it's allomancy on steroids. And just seeing what she's able to do with it is so satisfying and exciting. And right from the like Marsh is going down for the final blow and she catches it and then just starts wrecking, and she's it's so good.
Those bones you just broke, they ain't broke no more.
Yeah.
Seeing like the full extent of what allomancy can do. And like we also get like a little bit of that with Ellen, where like he burned more atium than any person in history.
Yeah.
Excluding like the other like hundreds of soldiers that were doing the exact same thing. But like still, like that was a lot of atium. It was like it was always used so sparingly. But like no hold bars. It's a final boss fight. You can use all of your consumables.
He probably burned more atium than every other Mistborn in history combined. And
like it's so good. And like I loved the way Vin's ascension is described. Like how she's kind of getting like okay, I'm just recovered. I'm still a normal Mistborn. But then I'm doing things I've never done before. And now I'm jumping so high I'm above the clouds. And now I'm swatting Inquisitors around like flies. And it's like this steady buildup of power. And then she blows up Kredik Shaw. And you're like, whoa, what is going on here? And then she puffs away into mist because the power has subsumed her too much. Like
literal puff of magic blue smoke.
Yeah, the way Brandon, that's a great example, I think, of showing, not telling, because he's not saying, I'm getting more powerful by the second, but he's showing it, and it works very effectively.
Thank you for watching, everyone. You can find us at 17shard.com for your news, discussion, theories, and fun that you could ever want. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, leave us a review on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, and support us on Patreon. See you all next time. Bye.
Bye.